After a weekend in Florida, not long back in the White House, President Trump tweeted his reaction to President Zelenskyy, saying a peace deal is still very, very far away. President Trump said this is the worst statement that could be made by Zelenskyy, and America will not put up with it for much longer. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing. President Trump also ridiculed the meeting of Europe's leaders that happened in London yesterday, saying the leaders stated flatly that they cannot do the job of peacemaking without the US. Probably not a great statement, he wrote, to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking?
It was a productive summit. Together we agreed a clear strategy.
Keir Starmer had a very different view of the weekend gathering he convened. Britain, with allies, he said, was trying to ensure Ukraine was at the negotiating table in any American deal struck with Russia. He said Britain was ready to put forces in harm's way to protect the peace if peace is found.
Britain will play a leading role, with, if necessary, and together with others, boots on the ground and planes in the air.
Overnight in Kharkiv, a Russian drone struck an apartment building, injuring 8 people. Keir Starmer asked Donald Trump last week to promise his mighty military would back up British forces if they were patrolling near here and had to fend off Russian attacks. Donald Trump suggested he wouldn't need to do that, as Russia wouldn't attack territory where American employees were working on mining projects.
We're going to have a lot of people over there, so we'll be working in the country. So I just don't think you're going to have a problem.
Thousands of Americans will be in Ukraine. Is that of itself enough of a security guarantee? No. Or does it mean that we need to send British troops? And if we do, given the size of our army, how many?
The mineral deal is not enough on its own. But can I just remind him, Russia is the aggressor. Zelenskyy is a war leader whose country has been invaded. And we should all be supporting him and not fawning over Putin.
There's a great deal that still depends very much on Trump and the US administration. And whatever communique came out of London, which was very encouraging, I think very also supportive of Zelenskyy after a terrible White House meeting. Whatever communique is not going to fill the gap of the US only can bring certain capabilities, and the US is the only one that can lead a negotiation effort with Russia.
Disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
After Friday's clash in the Oval Office, British voters were asked by the polling company More in Common to describe in one word how they felt about these scenes. The bigger the print, the more people used that word.
The US and UK have a special relationship.
The White House never put out a glossy video to commemorate that visit, but they did for Keir Starmer's talks. Today, he was praised by his political opponents for his conduct that day and this weekend.
Our Prime Minister has 100% support from us.
The effective leadership which he has shown.
He has definitely spoken for Britain.
He has not really put a foot wrong.
Good to have him agreeing with me. We should do this more often.
But paying for new defence commitments could reshape Britain's post-Cold War spending patterns that have seen defence spending plummet and welfare state costs, especially health, soar.
To some extent, what we've done is fund the welfare state through cutting defence spending. Now, for the first time in this whole period, it looks like we're going to have a persistent increase in the amount we're spending on defence.
Presumably that can't be achieved just through a little cut here, a little cut there in other bits of the public realm.
We're definitely going to spend more on health, we're going to spend more on pensions, we're going to spend more on social care, but all of that together, I do find it, I'm afraid, hard to see a world in which we don't raise taxes further unless we find some way of growing the economy dramatically or finding other bits of public spending that we cut a lot.
So where do we see this on here?
Keir Starmer met with defence industry companies and apprentices to promote his promise that defence spending will aid British economic growth. One more line you never heard in the election campaign that recedes fast in the memory in turbulent times.
And Gary is with me now live. Where's all this heading?
Well, what's fundamentally going on is that the Europeans are trying to walk the Ukrainians to the negotiating table in a way that the Ukrainians can feel comfortable with. And at the forefront of their minds at the moment is trying to create a sort of trial ceasefire on the ground, which could create the conditions for negotiations. They wouldn't start before that, they might never start. But that is what is going on here. And what's concerning a lot of the Europeans, a lot of people around the world, is that Donald Trump seems wants all this to happen at warp speed. And this is a very difficult construct. You could hear Keir Starmer in there saying the whole idea of putting British forces into a buffer zone, clearly very alarming if you do not have American support. And more clearly even than he did in the White House last week, Keir Starmer was saying, a few personnel on the ground who happen to be, who are Americans who happen to be involved in mining interests in Ukraine, that doesn't wash it as a safeguard. That doesn't give him any security with which to put British forces in harm's way in what is a vast potential buffer zone running the whole length of Ukraine. So this is a buffer force we may never actually see, quite a few people in Whitehall feel. You can't be sure of anything except at the moment intense impatience in the White House.
Thanks, Gary. Well, let's take you to Washington, where, as you heard, Donald Trump has started the week by lashing out at Vladimir Zelenskyy again, and also Europe. Paul McNamara is there for us. Paul, what's the latest?
Yeah, you get a sense this weekend, after a relatively benign couple of days from Donald Trump, he's come back and the annoyance levels have been ratcheted up, but not just with President Zelenskyy, but with Europe too. So while European leaders were meeting with President Zelenskyy yesterday, Donald Trump was golfing in Mar-a-Lago. JD Vance, his vice president, was attempting to ski in Vermont. And it doesn't feel like he likes what he saw yesterday. Just in the last half an hour, he's posted on Truth Social, Europe has spent more money buying Russian oil and gas than they have spent on defending Ukraine by far. Has to be said, in this one occasion, when it comes to something that Donald Trump says regarding facts and figures, there is at least one report came out last week saying that he might be right on that. Regardless, what you get the sense of here is that time is running out for President Zelenskyy. That's not just something that Donald Trump is putting out in detail. That's something that his administration is explicitly saying. This morning, Michael Waltz, his national security advisor, did the rounds on the news, and he said not only that time was not on President Zelenskyy's side, but that he came out with three things that the Trump administration wants to hear from President Zelenskyy. And what was striking is how personal these are, given that this is pretty much the biggest crisis that NATO is facing since its formation in 1949. Number one, this is the first thing they want to hear from President Zelenskyy. They want to hear regret for what happened last Friday. Then they want to hear that he's ready to sign a minerals deal, then that he's prepared for peace. Now, you may have thought that, given everything that's going on, prepared for peace would have been number one, not his regret for an unfortunate incident in the Oval Office.
So if the not very failed threat is withdrawal of American support, how long could Ukraine survive?
This is where it gets really tricky. It's easy to think of the support for Ukraine just in terms of missiles and munitions, because that's what we see on all those pictures that come out of Ukraine. But the US provides two very important things. They provide intelligence and Starlink. Starlink is a company which Elon Musk owns, which provides mobile internet. Ukrainian troops are heavily reliant on both of those. When they want to find out where Russian troops are, they're using US intelligence and satellites. When they want to talk to each other, they are using Starlink. Take those things away and things get very tricky for Ukrainian troops very quickly.
Paul McNamara in Washington. Well, with me here is Dame Emily Thornberry, who's chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. What is the point of all this unity if Donald Trump is still throwing hand grenades?
Nobody said it's going to be easy. It's really difficult. And if you think back to Friday and how impossible it seemed and how down everyone was and how it looked like nothing was possible.
You think it's better today?
I think it's better today. I think it's better today. I actually think that Keir Starmer was pitch perfect over the weekend. I think starting to pull the Europeans together. We've still got a long way to go, but I think that at least we're trying, or at least we're going in the right direction.
But what actually changed at this summit? I mean, it was all just a restatement of where we are, wasn't it?
Well, no. What changed was this recognition that Europe is going to need to do heavy lifting. Europe is going to need to take the lead on this. We are going to need to do much more than we have done. All of that is now, bringing people together, and a sort of seriousness of intent, and a path through. This is possible. We can do this. We don't just sit back and just say, "Oh, isn't it awful?" No, we have to do something about it. And there is the beginnings of a plan. I understand Donald Trump's impatience, and on the one hand, we have impatient Donald Trump, and on the other hand, we have Zelenskyy who's saying, I want to move forward to victory. We do all need to kind of start on the basis that we need peace, but we don't want to lose as peace. We need to have a peace that is actually fair and just for Ukraine and has guarantees.
Yes, I mean, there was lots of talk about Ukrainian sovereignty today in the House of Commons. Yes. And nobody said, is that the sovereignty of Ukraine as it was, or Ukraine as it is today, with Russia occupying a percentage of the land?
Well, the other thing about sovereignty also is, to what extent will they be allowed to make decisions about their future? So will they be able to join the EU?
But what is it for you? I mean, if you say, we must preserve Ukrainian sovereignty, is it sovereignty with today's front lines, or is it as it was in 22?
So for me, Ukrainian sovereignty is their ability to be able to make decisions about their own future. I think that there will need to be negotiations in relation to land. I think that we need to be realistic about that, but we need to have a Ukraine which is safe and secure and it's fair, and they need to have won. They need to have won. They've sacrificed too many people. They've had 3 years of absolute misery and bravery on their part, and we can't just walk away and just go, well, hand it over to Putin.
You raised the question of aid cuts to fund all this defence spending. How much concern is there that the damage to British overseas aid is much bigger than the uplift in defence spending, which is gesture politics, really?
No, there has to be an increase in the amount of money we spend on defence, without a doubt. The world has definitely changed.
But 2.5 doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah, but my concern is always that actually our security depends on all kinds of other things. It isn't just on the hard power. Actually, things like making sure that a country is secure. That the way the country runs is they have proper elections, that they have proper assistance. That's the kind of security that you also need. You need to have nation building. And Keir has himself said that he wants to prioritise Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan. And my concern is that the cuts to the overseas development aid is so much that, given that a third of it has to be spent on people claiming asylum and going into asylum hotels, that there's so little left that by the time we pay our dues to the various international organisations, there's very little left. And there may not even be enough to do those three priorities. And we may find ourselves...
Well, they keep talking about this. I've just come back from Sudan. Our impact there is tiny.
Well, yes and no. It depends where you look, and it depends what it is that you're looking at. But can I also say that I also am concerned that we may look back on this period as the time when Britain and possibly other countries walked away from places like Africa and left it to China.
Well, isn't that what we're doing?
Well, that's the concern. I mean, that's the concern. So that's why we do need to look at this too. But I completely understand that we need to be spending more on defence, and we have to step up. And actually, the threat to Europe through Ukraine is a threat to Europe, and Europe has to take responsibility for that.
But won't people think, well, given how much we're spending and the impact of that on domestic spending, we're still saying we need the Americans. If we still need the Americans, what's the point of all the sacrifice?
Because we need the Americans for specific things. So we need the Americans in Ukraine for air cover and for intelligence and for long-range missiles. I mean, actually, those are the things we need them for. And so that's what we need them to do. We need to be clear with them. You do that, and we will do this. And we need to kind of have a plan together. We need to put it in front of Zelenskyy and say, look, this will work. And we need to say to Trump, this will work. Come on, let's move forward together.
Emily Thornbury, thank you very much indeed.
Not at all.
Well, earlier I spoke to Michael C. Ryan, who was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy in the first Trump administration. And I began by asking if he expects the minerals deal between the US and Ukraine to be back on, and if Zelenskyy will be invited back to the White House to sign it.
No, I think at some point the mineral deal will get done. The dynamics over the weekend of Europe convening with President Zelenskyy to work on a peace proposal that they could then present to the White House is a very dramatic and very important advancement of the cause of peace. And I think in that context, there will be a deal on the minerals, yes.
Do you think America is chastened at all by the sharp contrast in treatment of Vladimir Zelenskyy by Europe and by Britain in particular, a hug from Keir Starmer, to the way he was treated in the Oval Office? I mean, do Americans find it embarrassing at all?
I think they do find it embarrassing because they're not used to high-level diplomacy done in that way. That much is certain. But I also think they're quite taken with President Zelenskyy and his ability to fight his corner, if you will, and stand up for himself. And we're very used to President Trump, and so he's very capable of quickly turning 180 degrees. You recall his dictator comment, and he said, "Did I say that? I don't remember." And so it could very easily happen.
So your advice as someone who worked for him, would it be don't take him so seriously?
Listen to the spirit of what President Trump says, not the words, and try to understand what he's trying to do and how he intends to go about it. And then things start to fall in place.
Right, but I mean, you see, the way it's being seen here increasingly is that America is no longer a reliable security partner. Is that what America wants?
The representatives of the United States people are in the Congress. In December of 2023, the Congress passed a law that no president could unilaterally withdraw the United States from NATO, and it passed overwhelmingly. The majority of Americans have ancestry from Europe, and we're culturally aligned. So no, I don't think the United States wants to be separate from Europe at all.
Vladimir Zelenskyy and Europe and all the other NATO partners believe that a security guarantee from America is absolutely vital, because a security guarantee from Europe is not enough. Do you think America is ultimately prepared to give that beyond American contractors working on mines in Ukraine?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We have to understand what's going on here. The administration is strongly engaged in getting Putin to the table. President Trump's greatest leverage is the security guarantees. So there will be security guarantees, but those will be defined by the context at the end game of the negotiations, because stronger U.S. security guarantees, which Ukraine would like and which Europe supports, would be intimidating to the Russians. And so if they're not coming far enough towards an agreement, President Trump has that option. If, on the other hand, the Russians are leaning far forward, which I doubt, but it could happen, and the Europeans and the Ukrainians are reluctant to make any more concessions, then President Trump could weaken the security guarantees to force them to make an agreement. So this discussion of security guarantees now is incredibly premature, and President Trump, I do not believe, will be drawn out on the question. I mean, the art of the deal is in the closing. And so you want to preserve your leverage for the closing so that you can get all the parties to give that last little bit that they were reluctant to give in order to get an agreement.
Europe only speaks sort of in broad terms about the sovereignty of Ukraine, and what we don't know is whether that means Ukraine as it was in 2022 or Ukraine as it is now. What do you think they're going to end up at?
Well, I think the international community writ large will reaffirm the statements made in 1991 at the end of the Cold War when the Soviet Union collapsed. The territorial integrity of all the nations at that time and the self-determination of those peoples to act as they want. President Zelenskyy himself has said, we might not be able to get back all of Ukraine back now, but what was Ukraine will be Ukrainian again by other means. And I think the West, certainly, even the United States, will support that.
You sound, I have to say, astonishingly optimistic.
President Trump is disrupting, it seems, at the center, but he's really trying to influence the margins. And again, the margins come into play at the final end game of the negotiation. And that's where it's really going to play out. Again, the first step is to get President Putin to the table.
Michael C. Ryan, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.